Today, a CNBC exclusive. Billionaire Sam Zell on the Wall Street bailout. He tells Maria what he thinks will work. Closing bell today, 4 Eastern.
Just a quick reminder, at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, a special edition of Street Signs with Aaron Burnett, and you can see it's an all-star lineup. Some of the people that have been on Capitol Hill, as a matter of fact, doing some of the questioning today. Senator Schumer, Senator Shelby, and Chairman Barney Frank. Steve Leisman, your impressions of what you're hearing right now on the Hill.
Yeah, Sue, very quick comment. I think the tension here that's ongoing throughout this is Congress wants to know what's your process for buying these assets in such a way that you protect the taxpayer, but also do some good for the markets. They keep talking very vaguely about these mechanisms that are out there, and they won't say what they are. So you have to wonder, do they not know, or is there some reason for them not to say? I think by the time this process is over, maybe not here, maybe over the next couple of days, we've got to know from Treasury and the Federal Reserve what are these mechanisms that are going to solve the essential tension that is existing right now between Congress and the executive.
All right, let's go back to the hearing.
Well, we've already got the anti-fraud authority, but we need...
You're talking about a statutory gap. That's what you mentioned.
Yes, we have a big... somebody in the government needs to be able to look at this.
Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I listen here for a while, I get the sense that while you have given this a lot of thought, by the same token, I get some sense that we're flying by the seat of our pants. And that in that respect, you know, that you want to come in strong and have the cavalry be there, but you're not quite sure what the cavalry does once it arrives. And that's part of my concern here. You know, the trouble is that these assets are so intertwined and complex that no one seems to be able to figure out what they're worth. And hence, no one's been willing to buy them, which is why, Mr. Chairman, as you described, they've been in a lockdown mode. But you talked about the maturity price, and I just wonder how, in fact, since they are impossible to value as instruments at this point in time, how does one actually achieve that? If the Secretary pays the market rate, presumably, if that was enough to be able to achieve the sale, that would be enough to persuade banks to sell already. So they would have sold. For that plan to work, then it would almost seem that you have to pay some type of a premium. And if that is the case, and I've heard the Secretary say many times we're going to look towards market mechanisms, well, you know, some of us are concerned that market mechanisms have brought us to where we are today. So how do you know, how does any of these institutions even know how to bid, for example, in the reverse auction, if in fact they couldn't in the first place determine what the value is? And therefore, how do we make the determination of what, in fact, the hold-to-maturity price is so that the taxpayers don't get left holding the bag?
The holders have a view of what they think it's worth. The trouble is it's difficult for those outside to know what it's worth. And I think that there are combinations, and I want to be clear, I haven't, you know, specified a specific mechanism, and this is an important thing to be looking at. But I do believe that there are combinations of market-based type auction procedures with expert input that would reveal, just as when you sell a painting at Sotheby's, you don't know, nobody knows what it's worth until the auction's over, then people know what it's worth. I think it's the same thing here. If you have an appropriate auction mechanism together with other types of inputs with flexibility to address different assets in different ways, I think what you will do is you'll restart this market, and then you'll get a sense of what the more fundamental value is.
In essence, what you're going to do is ultimately you create a massive repricing, right?
On the grounds that the prices that we now see are what I called fire sale prices, prices that are seen when you sell into an illiquid market.
There's no doubt that we're seeing government intervention. There's no doubt about it. And I would just add, it's not just market mechanisms that have got us where we are today. It's also a hopelessly failed and outmoded and outdated regulatory structure that's helped get us where we are today also.
Well, I would add to that, even within the regulatory structure, you have a lack of pursuing some of the regulations that we have aggressively in doing that. Let me ask you, what in this process do you envision not having the market try to manipulate the process in doing so? For example, what makes you believe that the institutions won't sell the very worst of the assets that they have in order to unload them and, in essence, be able to do that?
What we're going to do is we are going to do this focusing on one asset class at a time. So we will start off with maybe simpler asset classes, and it may be that one of the things we're going to want to do over time is buy some of the most illiquid asset classes and pay for them appropriately in order to preserve the system and do the things that all the things you've heard me emphasize before to protect the taxpayer.
Let me ask you, Chairman or Secretary, you said the institutions believe there's a value. They think that there's a value. The question is, when you have it in the reverse auction, what if they ultimately offer a value you don't think is appropriate?
Well, this is one of the reasons, you know, that in response to Senator Bennett, you know, if we keep the range of participants too narrow, only failing institutions, for example, then we won't have a robust competitive auction. The more participants we have, the more people who are involved in offering these assets will have a competition. And auctions are good at producing, you know, relevant prices, even if individuals have an incentive to underprice.
Well, let me ask you this. I've heard you both make statements today and in the past that would lead one to believe that at the end of the day there's minimal risk to the taxpayers here. And in fact, I've heard you say that there are some who argue that in fact we could make money. Can you both look at me in the eye and tell me that as we increase the debt limit of the United States by $700 billion, which basically means about $2,333 for every man, woman, and child in this country, that this will not cost the taxpayers anything if we pursue what you want us to do?
I never said, I never made any guarantees like that. There's going to be risk involved, for sure.
Can you quantify then the risk?
No, we're going to have to look at it. But I think that what's clear is that this $700 billion is not an expenditure. There's going to be a substantial amount of recovery. Whether it's the full amount is hard to know.
I think what
Can you put your microphone on?
Senator, I think what you've heard me say today is that, unfortunately, there's great risk to the taxpayer today with what we have. The taxpayer is already on the hook through no fault of his or her own. You know, the taxpayer's on the hook because if the system doesn't work the way it needs to work, people aren't going to get the loans they need, small businesses aren't going to get the capital they need, farmers aren't going to get the loans they need. So the taxpayer, there's risk to the taxpayer. Now, in terms of what we're doing here, you have not heard me say that there's not risk to the taxpayer. You've heard me say there's less risk to the taxpayer than this course, less risk than not doing it.
Can you give us any quantification of what that risk is?
I cannot give you the quantification because, and explain why. We are not making an expenditure. We're buying assets, we're holding assets, and we're reselling assets. And what the cost to the taxpayer will ultimately be will depend upon how the economy recovers, what happens in the housing markets, and how we execute this program. And so I wish there were a simple answer. I don't like being in this position, but I need to tell you the truth. And I certainly have not told you there's no risk to the taxpayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Menendez. This is Senator Martinez. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Crapo. I apologize. Trying to remember the order of everyone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to go first to you.
All right, we're going to take a quick break here as Senator Crapo of Idaho gets underway with his questioning. I would point out the obvious as you watch the market here, a slow move south for the major averages, albeit the word slow is working here. It is very clear the traders today have their eyes glued to this testimony on Capitol Hill, which we will get back to in just a moment. Stay with us.